Hello, and welcome to the Corporate Flood and Heat Risk Management Program's Heat Risk Mitigation and Adaptation module, developed in partnership between partners in Project Green and Toronto and Region Conservation Authority's Ecosystem and Climate Science team. Today, we're going to be discussing the causes and impacts of heat waves and the urban heat island effect in the Greater Toronto Area and urban areas overall. As you'll learn, one of the main causes of urban heat is urbanization, which gives businesses of all sizes and sectors a great opportunity to mitigate increasing heat using green infrastructure to benefit their community, employees, and bottom line. This module will highlight the issues with urban heat, their primary causes, how to best protect your business, and support you in finding solutions and tools that help the environment and save you money. We hope you enjoy this webinar and associated resources. So some background about us. Toronto and Region Conservation Authority, or TRCA, is one of 36 conservation authorities in Ontario. These were created to safeguard and enhance the health and well-being of watershed communities throughout the protection and restoration of the natural environment and the ecological services the environment provides. Michelle and myself are part of the Ecosystem and Climate Science team, which was created to focus on research relating to ecology, green infrastructure, and climate science. For this module, we are lending our expertise on urban heat mitigation and adaptation through green infrastructure to partners in Project Green and the businesses they support. The agenda for today is to go through 3 major chapters, starting by setting the stage with the background on urban heat through heat waves and the urban heat island effect to understand the causes and impacts of urban heat. Then moving into chapter 2 about using green infrastructure as a tool to mitigate and adapt to that heat. And finally, in Chapter 3, we will look at why businesses may choose to implement local actions to mitigate urban heat and how to select the right green infrastructure approach for your property. We're going to begin by understanding different types of urban heat, their causes and effects, and where people are most vulnerable. There are multiple causes and types of urban heat. One you might be very familiar with in the Greater Toronto Area is heat waves or extreme heat events. Typically, very hot days in southern Ontario are considered those above 30 degrees Celsius, with heat warnings issued when there's a forecast of 2 or more consecutive days, with daytime maximum temperatures of 31 degrees or warmer, together with nighttime minimum temperatures of 20 degrees or warmer. Or when there's a forecast of 2 or more consecutive days, with humidex values expected to reach 40 degrees or higher. While heat waves have always occurred, climate change is increasing the duration, frequency, and intensity of these events. If we continue to emit heat-trapping greenhouse gases, by the year 2050, many parts of the country are projected to experience a doubling in the annual number of very hot days over 30 degrees. By the year 2080, the annual mean temperatures in Peel Region and other parts of the GTA are expected to rise as much as 5 degrees from current levels, and the frequency of extreme heat days over 30 degrees will increase by as much as 5 times from current levels, up to 55 days per year. Heat waves cause heat stroke, exhaustion, fainting, rashes, and edema or swelling, as well as worsening of pre-existing health conditions. Extreme heat is now the leading cause of weather-related illness and death in Canada, impacting vulnerable populations the most, including children, the elderly, those with pre-existing conditions, low-income households without access to indoor cooling, and those who spend long hours outside, such as outdoor workers. For example, heat waves in Quebec caused 291 deaths in 2010 and 86 in 2018. The 2021 extreme heat event that affected much of Western North America led to 619 heat-related deaths in British Columbia, an event that has been found to be virtually impossible without human-caused climate change. And a larger heat wave led to over 20,000 deaths in 2022 in Europe. Another important climate indicator is the number of warm nights. When temperatures remain high overnight, it prevents people's body temperatures from cooling down. As you'll see in the second graph on the right, Toronto is expected to see almost 40 warm nights a year by the 2080s under a high greenhouse gas emissions scenario. The next 5 years are projected to be the warmest ever recorded as greenhouse gases and El Niño are predicted to send temperatures soaring. While heat waves are caused by the weather and amplified by climate change, the effects are much stronger in cities because of the added stress caused by the urban heat island effect. Consider black asphalt on a hot summer day. It absorbs heat from the sun and radiates it back to the surroundings. As you can see in these images, the street in direct sunlight is over 60 degrees Celsius in orange, twice that of the shaded areas in blue. Pavements and buildings trap heat and increase the temperature of the entire city. There are also fewer trees and green spaces to provide shade and natural cooling. And adding to this problem is that waste heat from human activities like driving and air conditioning add to the heat burden in the city. All of these factors contribute to the urban heat island effect. The average air temperature of medium to large cities in North America is generally 1 to 3 degrees warmer than the surrounding countryside. But on particularly hot days, the temperature of urban landscapes can be as much as 12 degrees warmer than the surrounding rural regions. Overnight, these warm buildings and pavement can re-radiate that heat back into the environment, which is why cities often stay hot overnight in the summer. As we discussed on the slide before, it's this continuous 24-hour heat that can be the most deadly. So let's take a closer look at the causes of urban heat islands. As mentioned, the conversion from vegetated or water-covered landscapes to developed impervious surfaces like buildings and pavement is the primary cause. For example, the daytime temperature of normal asphalt can be up to 20 degrees hotter than unshaded grass. This is because building materials are often dark or made of metal, which holds more heat. On top of that, urban geometry with tall buildings closely packed along a street form what is known as urban canyons, which means that while there may be shade, any light that reaches the surface is absorbed or reflected back to windows and bounces around, trapped near the surface. And finally, the buildings and vehicles in cities themselves emit much more heat because of energy use compared to that of a natural ecosystem. If you're watching this module with your business property in mind, think about your immediate area. How many buildings are there? How tall are they? Are they closely packed? Are they built primarily with metal or dark materials? Do they have lots of windows to bounce light? We'll explore these questions and what they mean for selecting the right urban heat mitigation approach later, but it may be helpful to start thinking about it now as we move into the impacts of urban heat. Together, heat waves and urban heat islands increase the risk to people's health. As mentioned before, the number of heat-related deaths is increasing, and since urban heat islands increase heat in the day and night, this can limit the body's ability to cool down during heat waves, causing dehydration, fatigue, and the inability to sweat, magnifying the risk of adverse health impacts during such events for city residents. Populations particularly susceptible to illness and death from exposure to extreme heat include those who are elderly, children, people who are socioeconomically marginalized, especially people experiencing homelessness or inadequate housing, and also people who are chronically ill or physically impaired, even those who are physically active, Indigenous peoples, newcomers to Canada, and outdoor workers. Beyond serious health risks, higher temperatures can also impact Canadians' productivity, livelihoods, and quality of life. For example, by limiting time that outdoor workers can comfortably work during the day or time that children can safely play outdoors. The increase in heat-related illness is also an economic burden on healthcare systems, as more people need care for heat stroke, heart disease, and respiratory disorders such as asthma. Increasing heat also increases susceptibility to infectious diseases. In Canada, this cost is projected to be $3 to $3.9 billion a year by 2050. Additionally, a study in the United States in 2020 found that heat-related reductions in worker productivity cost $44 billion across 12 cities. This is expected to rise to $84 billion by 2050. A lot of this is due to outdoor workers, but can also affect those who use public or non-air conditioned modes of transportation for their commutes. Urban heat can also increase electricity bills as the need for AC rises. On a day that might be bearable in a rural area, a 12-degree increase in the city because of urban heat island effect would put many over their comfort and safety threshold. If enough people increase their air conditioning usage, this strain on the electrical system can also cause brownouts or blackouts. The impact of urban heat is also felt in natural systems and by urban wildlife. For example, stormwater runoff on hot pavements and rooftops carry away the heat, increasing temperatures in aquatic ecosystems that stress wildlife. And finally, the climate model projections we showed earlier for the number of very hot days expected over the next few decades don't actually take into account the urban heat island effect. Consequently, the number of dangerously hot days and nights in Canada's cities will likely be even higher than the figures indicate. While heat waves are caused by climate change and are largely outside of our control at the community level, urban heat islands can be mitigated by individual action, so that's what we will focus on in this module. Because urban heat islands are caused by local urbanization and the amount of heat retaining impervious surfaces, the effect is not felt equally across a city. This means that parks or residential areas with a lot of tree canopy cover will be noticeably cooler than industrial, commercial, and institutional areas. See here how the map of tree canopy cover is almost the exact inverse of surface temperature in TRCA's jurisdiction across the GTA. Therefore, local actions to increase tree cover or other vegetation can have an immediate and major impact on urban heat within a community. As an example, let's look at the region of Peel. This map is part of a data visualization and analytics tool developed by Evergreen called AI for the Resilient City. This shows current and projected heat maps across Peel by Stats Canada Census Tract. At the regional scale, temperature only shows up as small dots, but as you zoom in, the spatial coverage of their estimate is complete. The area we're looking at here, marked with a white star, is the intersection of Dixie and Dundas in Mississauga, which has high densities of commercial and industrial land use in pink and orange, surrounded by residential lands in purple. As this tool is structured by census tract, we'll be focused on the area south of Dundas, outlined in the yellow box. Overlaying a dataset of current land surface temperature for the census tract, we can see that the average is 37.81 degrees Celsius. This is the temperature of the ground rather than the air, so it's quite a bit hotter than you may expect. But as a comparison, a tract of predominantly agriculture and forest in northern Caledon in the same simulation had an average temperature of 29.26, almost 10 degrees cooler. In this layer, there are pockets of even hotter areas, up into the 50s for a couple of industrial properties. But also, as you can see in the top right, there's a strip of cooler land where Etobicoke Creek runs through and is surrounded by vegetation. With the Evergreen tool, we can see what would happen if we were to increase the amount of greenness, a proxy for vegetation, in this area by 15%. Unfortunately, this feature doesn't retain the spatial location of Etobicoke Creek, but overall, the heat across the census tract has decreased by 0.16 degrees to 37.65. And looking at this animation, you can see why, as there are no longer large areas of darker yellow, orange, and red. This shows the increasing vegetation is effective at decreasing heat at the local scale. And with that, I will pass it over to Michelle for our second chapter.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Joanna. All right, so moving on to chapter 2, we're going to discuss green infrastructure and how it can help communities adapt and reduce to urban heat. So we're going to start off with the definition because we could all carry on a full conversation about green infrastructure, and at the end of it, we could all still be actually talking about different things. So green infrastructure can be defined as natural vegetative systems and green technologies that collectively provide society with a multitude of economic, environmental, and health and social benefits. And this definition includes both natural and human-made solutions. So essentially, green infrastructure includes natural systems like wetlands, forests, meadows. It includes enhanced green assets like rain gardens, bioswales, urban trees, and then also engineered assets like permeable pavement and cisterns. And I did want to mention that green infrastructure also includes soil. So none of the vegetation we're talking about can grow and thrive without soils. They are really important, and they really are the support network for our green infrastructure systems. We also think it's generally important to quickly note what's not included when we're talking about green infrastructure. That's specifically things like renewable energy, electric vehicle charging, and conventional wastewater treatment. There's also some technologies for reducing urban heat, such as cool roofs, which use these light-colored materials like white vinyl as roof coverings to reflect light back before it's absorbed. This technology doesn't include or emulate a natural vegetative system. So it can be great, and it's often a great option, but it's not what we're going to be talking about or focusing on today. Okay, so let's dig in. Of the various types of green infrastructure, the main category used to reduce and adapt to urban heat is vegetation. And within this, primarily trees, but also other vegetation. And it's important to understand that vegetation reduces temperature in two ways. So the first, this one's perhaps less obvious, but all plants release water through their leaves through a process called evapotranspiration. And this water then evaporates from liquid to gas, and this cools the air around it. And depending on the amount of vegetation and the climate, this can reduce air temperatures by 1 to 5 degrees Celsius. The second way is trees and plants provide shade. So here, leaves can capture 70 to 90% of the sun's energy before it even reaches the surface. So unlike hard surfaces, this energy is also not re-radiated the same way overnight. So temperatures stay lower. A study in the city of Toronto found that there was a difference of almost 12 degrees Celsius between the average temperature of a built surface shaded by a tree versus no tree. And for parked cars, as many of us have probably looked for a shady parking spot in the heat of summer, those shade benefits can be even more significant. They can reduce temperatures by about 25 degrees Celsius. So all vegetative green infrastructure reduces heat to a degree, but no pun intended, but they all have different levels of co-benefits. So next we're gonna look through the benefits of different options, and then we'll finish off this chapter looking at a study that actually compares their impact the different green infrastructure has on temperature and then also energy savings. All right, starting with trees. The decrease in urban heat due to trees has real impacts on heat-related health complications. So for example, Toronto neighborhoods with less than 5% tree canopy cover have approximately 5 times as many heat-related ambulance calls compared to those with greater than 5% canopy cover. And then, still considering the importance of trees for health, the reduction in skin cancer due to shade trees blocking UV rays led the City of Toronto to develop shade guidelines for city-owned properties. So this guidance really stresses the need for shade in areas with outdoor activities, both for children as well as for outdoor workers. So beyond reducing heat and improving health, trees provide many other co-benefits. They're really wonderful. So these other benefits include, they lower energy use in the summer from shading, and then also some trees do it in the winter by providing windscreens. There's improvement to air and water quality. Trees produce oxygen for us. They provide stormwater management, they provide habitat for wildlife species, and they also sequester carbon and storage, which helps with climate change mitigation. Also, from a financial perspective, cooler pavements that are shaded by trees often need less maintenance, which can save money. And shaded areas are a great option for outdoor breaks and for lunches, for businesses. And this is especially important as spending time around trees and other green infrastructure has proven mental health benefits. All right, so the next green infrastructure option we're going to talk about is green walls. So these have a few different terms. They're also called living walls. They can be called green facades or vertical vegetation. But essentially, these consist of a vertical structure, often attached to external walls that are intentionally covered in vegetation. So green walls are a good option if there's no room for trees. A key benefit for businesses is that they really help reduce energy use, especially if the building is over 2 stories tall and wouldn't benefit directly from shade from a tree. Green walls shade building walls, but the primary way they cool is actually through evapotranspiration. So a study found that in Montreal, a green wall that was able to decrease the surface air temperature by an average of 9 degrees Celsius. And green walls also insulate buildings, which improves efficiency of both heating and cooling. So that decreases the need for air conditioning in the summer, even during heat waves potentially. And there are some other benefits to green walls too. So they provide noise reduction. They are often helping with waterproofing surfaces. They improve air quality, again, with vegetation. They can provide habitat for different wildlife species. And I think they're pretty. They have an aesthetic value. And this value can also signify that a business is engaged in sustainability to anyone who walks by the building. So similar to green walls, there's a technology called green roofs. So you might have heard of this, but this is vegetation growing on the tops of buildings. They're more common. And again, this is primarily small plants, but it can include trees when a building can handle the weight of the tree and the soil required to grow it. This vegetation can shade and cool the air near the surface of the roof to reduce heat in the building. And this is really important because conventional rooftop surfaces can be really hot. They are a lot hotter than the ambient air temperature. And while the impact of a green roof for urban heat is pretty similar to non-green infrastructure approaches like a cool roof, there are often lots of additional benefits provided by including that vegetation piece. So these again are energy savings, reduced air and water pollution, habitat for wildlife like pollinating insects. I can actually see a green roof from my apartment and it has a couple beehives amongst all the plants. Green roofs can also potentially be a meeting place, like in this picture, or a rest area for staff or clients. And if they're designed as such, they can grow food. So you can turn your green roof into a garden as well. Okay, so the last type of green infrastructure we're going to highlight is low impact development, or LID. So these approaches are primarily designed to manage stormwater and reduce flooding. So many LID approaches include vegetation, not all of them do, but this vegetation is included in ways that reduce heat as a co-benefit. And this type of technology might be ideal for properties that have both heat and flooding concerns. So LID encompasses a variety of practices like rain gardens. These are planted depressions that usually replace part of a lawn, but then they collect some stormwater and absorb it into a garden. Bioswales, which are long vegetated channels and a little bit more engineered, and they're used to direct and treat stormwater. There are stormwater tree trenches. So these are where trees are planted in a technology that's a linear subsurface trench to promote healthy growing conditions, enough soil for that tree to thrive, while also managing the stormwater runoff. And again, I keep mentioning water. These techniques are primarily designed to collect water, but the vegetation also reduces surface and air temperatures through both shading and evapotranspiration. So one non-vegetative LID example we did want to touch on because it's interesting is permeable pavement. So these are typically pavers or asphalt alternatives to conventional pavement, and they allow water to drain through the surface, often into a stone reservoir and then eventually into the soil. So because this surface is more similar to bare ground than conventional concrete, the surface temperature of permeable pavements can actually be about 10 degrees Celsius lower than normal. And this can even reduce the air temperature by up to a degree Celsius. So if you want to learn more about LID, there's a lot of content in Module 4 of the Flood Risk Mitigation and Adaptation modules, which is all about the use of LID and green infrastructure for stormwater management. We really only scratched the surface of LID today. Okay, so to finish off this chapter, let's look at some research that compares the heat reduction and adaptation power of different green infrastructure approaches. So this study was by the Toronto Metropolitan University that looked at the impact of implementing and increasing tree canopy, green walls, and green roofs on air temperature and energy use in a Brampton residential neighborhood. So for this study, the researchers simulated the impact of changing green infrastructure during regular summer weather, as well as a heat wave, all in a 10-day period. So the simulations they looked at included increasing tree canopy from 20% of the urban area in steps up to 50%, integrating green wall systems that covered 20 to 60% of the buildings, and integrating green roof systems that covered 20 to 60% of building roof areas. So, as we would expect, maximum enhancement, so this is 50% tree coverage, 60% green wall, and green roofs, had the largest impact. So this level of green infrastructure, it's perhaps not surprising that it had the most impact, but it reduced the average air temperature by up to 2 degrees Celsius, and this saved 25.6% of energy consumption. And it also kept the maximum humidex value to under 40, which is the heat warning level, even during the modeled heat wave. So this is really important because this means the neighborhood was kept under a key threshold for heat stress dangers to populations. That said, maximizing every green infrastructure approach generally isn't very feasible. So with perhaps some more interesting results were when they separated the effects of the three different approaches. So what they found was that increasing tree canopy was the most effective at reducing urban heat. So it lowered the temperature a quarter of a degree Celsius for every 10% increase in tree canopy. And they found that trees were twice as effective as green roofs and 3 times as effective as green walls at this benefit. However, the green wall system was the biggest contributor to building energy savings with an amount of 0.15 kilowatt hour per meter squared for each 10% increase in vegetation. So this result was twice as effective as increasing canopy and 3 times as effective as green roofs. So this study, it was mainly focused on a small neighborhood, but if a similar enhancement and associated temperature reductions were applied across the entirety of Brampton, they also estimated that it would reduce mortality by 290 people or 8.8% annually. And this was largely due to heat-related mortality being avoided, but the same enhancements would also improve air quality, which in turn also has health benefits. So that's one of the key pieces about green infrastructure that we really like to emphasize is, you might build it for flooding or you might build it for heat, but it has all these other co-benefits that are really, really important. All right, so that brings us to our final chapter, and I'm going to hand it back over to Joanna to look at why and how to reduce urban heat using green infrastructure.
Thanks, Michelle. In our final chapter, we want to discuss why private landowners and businesses would choose to mitigate urban heat through installing green infrastructure on their properties. And once that choice is made, how to select the right green infrastructure approach. So why mitigate urban heat? The main reason is to achieve heat resilience, where heat is proactively managed to avoid negative consequences, such as heat-related illness and mortality, increasing energy use, and decreasing worker productivity. The reason for using green infrastructure rather than simply painting an area white or otherwise cooling is that green methods provide co-benefits such as increasing air and water quality and providing wildlife habitat. This local reduction in heat and improvement of the environment reduces the vulnerability of community members, including staff, clients, commuters, neighbors, and communities downwind, while creating a more beautiful neighborhood. On a larger scale, some green infrastructure, like trees, sequester and store carbon, which is important to mitigate the negative effects of climate change, like heat waves. Green infrastructure also has great return on investment. The main benefit is energy savings from reduced electricity needed for cooling and heating buildings. Having healthy trees also increases property values, retail spending, and contributes to a sense of community pride and safety. And studies have reported a variety of positive effects of plants visible to employees in and around their workplace. This includes improvements to employee morale, attitude, and productivity, and reductions in reported incidents of employee illness and fatigue. To give an example, a 2013 study by the National Resources Defense Council estimated the financial benefits of installing green infrastructure for a 4-story, 32-unit residential building, which received a 784 meter squared green roof installed at the end of life, 12 trees, bioswales, and a rain garden. With these criteria, the property received over 1.7 million US dollars in benefits. The main ones to consider are those for energy savings, increased rental income, and increased property value. Some of the other items will have varying applicability in the GTA. However, the City of Toronto does have a green roof incentive program of up to $100,000 in place of the tax credit for buildings with a gross floor area of less than 2,000 meters squared. And the cities of Mississauga and Brampton have a stormwater charge based on the area of hard surfaces on a property, which would be reduced by the green infrastructure in this case. Finally, in terms of installation costs, while green infrastructure can be more expensive to start, the benefits provide financial savings over time. For example, of the approaches we've covered, green roofs have a relatively high upfront cost. A US study found that the installation costs of a 1,951 meter squared green roof was $464,000, $129,000 more than a conventional roof. However, the green roof would deliver over $200,000 in lifetime savings. Nearly 2/3 of these savings were calculated to be from reduced energy needs for the building. But other benefits include delayed roof replacement, noise insulation benefits, appreciated property value, and public benefits such as stormwater management and improved air quality. While urban heat islands in particular can be improved by local projects that implement green infrastructure, because they're an urban phenomena, the areas creating and being affected by increasing heat are primarily privately owned land. Therefore, despite government-led policies and initiatives, businesses are essential for solving the problem. Industrial, commercial, and institutional businesses who own or otherwise have decision-making power over their properties can make a major impact on the heat vulnerability of their lot and surrounding community by adding trees, green walls, green roofs, or LID with temperature-reducing co-benefits. The following advice is most relevant for property owners, but tenants may also use this information to inform their landowners about the benefits of implementing green infrastructure. To identify the right type of green infrastructure for urban heat mitigation on your property, it's important to consider the unique features of the lot. Starting off with what areas are available to add green infrastructure. Do you have a parking lot, sidewalks, or other impervious outdoor areas? This will provide the most options for green infrastructure, and some options may be more economic if there are existing features that could be enhanced, like a swale or landscaped area. For building itself, important considerations include if the roof is built to withstand the weight of a green roof and has a slope of less than 10%, or if it's possible to attach vegetation to the building walls. Next, it's important to consider the features that affect your property's microclimate. Are buildings close together? Because this can lead to some self-shading, but also block wind. Are the roads and pathways oriented in a common wind direction, or are they perpendicular and therefore reducing wind? This is important in the GTA because humidity makes it harder for people to cool down. Therefore, if you were to plant trees, should be done consciously to avoid blocking breezes. Then finally, how tall are your buildings? If one of the co-benefits you're aiming for is energy reduction, note that trees only cool the first 2 floors of a building effectively. Otherwise, green walls or green roofs may be needed. Speaking of co-benefits, you should consider if there are any goals besides reducing urban heat that are an essential element of this project. The ones we've highlighted here as co-benefits include reducing building energy use, stormwater management, and providing shade for cars, outdoor workspace, commuters, or other community members. From this table, the key messages are that trees provide the greatest reduction in urban heat, as well as the most additional co-benefits, but only provide energy reduction if planted correctly and for buildings less than 2 stories. Alternately, green walls can help save the most energy, but are not always the top option for stormwater management. In terms of cost, there is great variability in the estimates for each option based on case-specific factors, such as the size of the area where green infrastructure will be implemented, the presence of existing features like landscaped areas that can be enhanced, and the existence or lack of available government incentives or programs. However, we provided a comparative cost column dividing the general expense of these options into 3 categories: low, medium, and high. For more specific estimates on the LID costs, see Module 4 for a full breakdown using the STEP LID lifecycle costing tool. Otherwise, what you'll notice here is that methods that cover less area, such as trees, rain gardens, or bioswales, are cheaper than large-scale methods that would replace existing features, like a green roof or permeable pavement. The latter is still a good option when a property's current roof or pavement needs replacing. However, the most approachable option with the largest impact for heat is still trees. As trees are our top recommendation, being both the most effective at reducing local heat and the most economic, we'd like to provide some additional considerations for selecting and planting trees in urban areas. For heat reduction, broadleaf trees are generally more effective than needle-leaf trees. Some examples include native maple, aspen, and oak trees. However, as we'll discuss more when talking about location, some evergreen green trees should be planted to maximize energy savings. When planting new trees, it's important to select native species and consider not just current conditions, but also climate change. The Peel Region Urban Forest Best Practice Guide 4 is all about species selection for street and park trees in a climate change context and includes tables and maps of species climate sensitivity, suitability, and whether they are native or invasive. We've shared how to access the guide in the module resources. Otherwise, for species, the key considerations are looking at which do well in urbanized environments, their projected height and spread, size and growth habits of roots, maintenance requirements, types of fruit, flowers, cones produced, and then how those relate to cleanup. The last point is especially relevant for trees in a parking lot to avoid anything that drops fruit or sap on cars. For further help with selection, STEP has a list of species and their associated salt, moisture, shade, pollution, and compaction tolerances that we've shared in the resources. To reduce urban heat, the target is large trees with full canopies. However, continuous canopy can reduce wind and trap heat under as well, so it's important to include some breaks in the canopy and to mix tree species and canopy architecture to allow for ventilation and escaping radiation. The cooling benefits of green spaces also affect downwind areas, so trees should be placed upwind of particularly hot areas if they cannot be treed as well. To maximize building energy savings, plant trees on the west or whichever side receives the most light at midday and afternoon. Choose broadleaf species to block the sun during the summer, but allow for light to warm the building in the winter after the leaves fall. For buildings wanting a wind break from winter winds, needle-leaf species or broadleaves that don't lose their leaves, like some oak species, are more appropriate on the side of the building facing the dominant wind direction. Trees should be planted at least 1.5 to 3 meters away from the building, but no more than 9 to 15 meters away. This all depends on the predicted mature tree height, and also remember that trees are the most effective at energy savings for buildings under 2 stories. Following guidance from resources such as STEP's guide, trees should be planted in areas within their tolerance range for salt, moisture, shade, pollution, and compaction. But even with these conditions met, trees need maintenance, such as watering, pruning, and pest control. Especially for young trees or during extended heat waves, watering will be necessary to ensure survival. Other maintenance may depend on your site conditions, tree species, or unforeseen events like storms. It's important to note that to reap most of the benefits of trees, they need to survive to maturity to provide real shade, cool air temperatures, and reach a point where the amount of carbon they sequester and store balances the amount that they release. Which brings us to our final section of best practices to improve tree survival and hard surface planting. For many urban properties, the only area available to plant trees is on currently impervious ground, such as in parking lots or wide sidewalks. Here, it's important to follow guidance on hard surface planting, particularly around providing ample soil that isn't too compacted by the surface above to allow for tree roots. Some options in hard surface areas include Silva soil cell technology or structural soil. Silva cells, like these pictured here, are used to protect roots from the weight of the pavement above and prevent compaction to allow for easy access to soil and structural soil mediums. Structural soil is a pavement substrate made up of a precise combination of crushed stone, clay loam, and hydrogel stabilizing agent. Structural soil can withstand the weight of the paved hardscape above, but is still permeable enough to allow for maximum root growth and water absorption. Additionally, trees in hard surface areas are often planted in linear trenches to allow for interconnected soil. Linear tree trenches also allow for the trees to be planted in a way that form continuous canopies that will increase the shade quality. In order to provide the maximum benefits, street tree trenches should be at least 6 feet wide. These trenches are not necessarily stormwater tree trenches, but can be built with further stormwater pipes to meet those standards. In any case, having this interconnected soil expands the catchment area to allow stormwater to serve as irrigation for the trees and reduce management needs, as lack of water is a key issue for urban trees. If you are interested in tree planting or implementing any of the other green infrastructure mentioned in this module, there are a few existing programs that support businesses. Working with established organizations can help answer questions about selecting the most appropriate green infrastructure type, identify any permitting requirements, and reduce costs. Firstly, LEAF, Local Enhancement and Appreciation of Forests, is a local NGO that helps and provides subsidized costs for major tree plantings on commercial properties, which you can access through their website for businesses in York and Toronto. Partners in Project Green, who we've introduced today and is part of the development of this module, is constantly developing and providing new programs to support businesses in sustainable practices. For information on their current programs, visit the website linked in the module resources. TRCA itself has a private land planting program which supplies native shrubs and trees from our nurseries, as well as full planting services, and can fund up to 90% of the cost for eligible properties. If interested, businesses can also have their staff participate in planting as part of a team day. For any business within neighborhood boundaries, TRCA also supports green infrastructure through the Sustainable Neighborhood Action Program, or SNAP, which is currently operating in Bramalea in Brampton and West Bolton in Caledon. Then Credit Valley Conservation, another conservation authority that borders TRCA to the west, makes up the other half of Peel Region's watersheds. And they have a corporate program called Greening Corporate Grounds to support the development and adoption of green infrastructure on site. This program is being brought across Peel by partners in Project Green. Finally, for support related to LID, information around grants is available in Module 4. Whatever approach you select, green infrastructure projects on your property should focus on the health and social co-benefits for your employees and clients, the economic co-benefits for return on investment for installing these features, and then the environmental co-benefits included so that you're also helping the local community and nearby environment. With that, we will end this module on heat risk mitigation and adaptation. For more information, you can go to Partners in Project Green's website and see the associated resources we have shared. This includes information on the Evergreen AI for Resilient City tool, a series of reports by the United States Environmental Protection Agency around urban heat island mitigation, Peel Region's guidance on tree species selection given climate change, the tree list resources developed by TRCA's Sustainable Technologies Evaluation Program, and Tree Canada's further guidance on tree planting in highly developed areas. This module was presented by Michelle Saka, Senior Research Scientist, and myself, Joanna Cleese Van Bommel, Technical Analyst, both with TRCA's Ecosystem and Climate Science team, and the research was supported by Chaya Chengapa, Program Manager, and Darlene Coyle, Coordinator, both from PPG and TRCA. Thank you very much for your time, and we hope you enjoyed this webinar.